flat before, and so thank you. This past month has contained what have been, without doubt, the most stressful moments of my thus far life. All of that stress has revolved around something that many of you have gone through a time or two or 10 before, and that's moving. That's stressful in and of itself. But we've had some circumstances that really ratcheted it up. We had closing set for Thursday, February 19th. I'm sure you know that date because you're aware that the 18th is my birthday. Thank you for not remembering. Anyway, but so we had back-to-back closings scheduled on the 19th. Sale on the old house, closing on the sale of the new house, back-to-back in the attorney's office. That type of thing happens all the time. As that is planned throughout the month of February, we've had a lot of bad weather. And looking at the forecast, we're aware of the fact that they're calling for not just one, but a couple of winter storms. We had that snow, ton of sleet, and then followed a couple days later by more snow. Knowing that that was coming, we asked the sellers if they would permit us to move in early. And the reason for that is because the house was vacant, the homeowner had died, the kids were selling the house, and since the home was vacant, they said that's fine. So we actually moved all of our stuff in on Monday when we're not supposed to close until Thursday. It's a little different, I suppose, but it was going to work out. So all that is going fine. We undertake the whole move thing on Monday. We're spending the night in that house that we have no legal claim to for a few days. And by Wednesday, though, I think we're cruising on into closing on Thursday morning. About 3 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, though, I get a call from my mortgage company, and the mortgage loan assistant is saying that we've got a problem, and it's possible that you may not be able to close tomorrow. And the reason for that is that they need this document that's called a no further action statement from the state. What had happened is that on this piece of property back a few months ago, there was an in-ground heating oil tank that had to be removed. And in doing so, you've got engineers and labs and all this kind of stuff going on. And it has to be done in keeping with state standards, and when that is done, the state issues a no further action statement saying, hey, there was a problem, it's been fixed, now you're good. Anyway, what we had was called a conditional no further action statement. They want one that's just no further action. And she said, I'm not sure if it's going to be able to come out of underwriting or not. We're still trying to work on that. So I go to bed on Wednesday night knowing I'm going to be able to sell a house, but not sure if I can buy one. We get up the next morning, and we head to the attorney's office, and I still haven't heard anything, and I'm very much on the edge. We get there, we have closing on the sale of our old house, and so we've sold our house. I get a nice big check, but I can't do anything with it because this other house is not going to close. So we leave the attorney's office that day, and I am technically a wealthy homeless person. And throughout that day, I'm making phone calls, but it's looking like, and what the mortgage company is saying is, no, for this to come out of underwriting, we've got to have that one particular document, and it could take as much as 60 days. Squatters have rights too. That was my thought. So here we are, in a home that we have no legal claim to. All of our stuff is in it. We want to buy it. We qualify to buy it, but I can't buy it. And so I am very, very stressed. I get up on Friday and I decided, you know what, I'm just not going to take no for an answer. I'm going to figure this bad boy out. And I began to make phone call after phone call after phone call. I deal with the engineer who was responsible for the excavation. I talk with people at the county, the region, and at the state. And I don't know how many dozens and dozens of phone calls, but I made a lot of them. And I became what I described in my own words as the single most annoying man in Guilford County. Some of you thought you were married to that person. Only Caroline has that distinction. The most annoying man in Guilford County, that was me. But to make a long story short, I finally am able to talk to the right person with the state. I explain our circumstances to her, and by 3 o'clock that afternoon, I've got the no further action statement. I'm just relieved. I can finally breathe for the first time in days. Immediately, I pass that on to the mortgage company, and the lender calls me back a short time later, and he says, yeah, we've got everything we need. You're going to be good to close now. And he said this, I don't know how the engineer got it done, but he got it done. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. I'm the most annoying man in Guilford County, not the engineer. But I don't say any of that. I mean, I say nothing. I completely left that slide. And what's going on is the engineer is getting credit for the good that I have done. He's getting credit for the work that I have done. But you know what? I don't care. I don't care if he says the engineer got it done and he knitted a blanket and crocheted a scarf while he was doing it. I do not care. All I want to be able to do is to have a house that I'm able to call my own. But he was getting credit for good, praise for good that I had done. You know, sometimes in life we experience that. You have experienced that before. Somebody does something or they get credit for good that you have done. And sometimes that registers with us, but it's not like we're losing sleep over that. Where we really cry foul, though, is when we do the right thing, when we do a good thing. And it's not simply that we don't get praise for it, but we actually get punished for it. That's when we really say, hey, time out on this. There is a problem. I have done the right thing. I have done a good thing, and now I'm getting punished for it. I'm suffering adverse consequences because I've done the right thing. That doesn't make any sense. In case you weren't aware of this, let me go ahead and break it to you. We talked a little bit about this last week as we have been and continue to walk through the life of Joseph. One of the things that I mentioned was this. Our choices have consequences. They always do. Doing the wrong has consequences. It has a price, but so too does doing the right. And sometimes as a committed, concerted follower of Jesus, you're going to be doing the right thing, and you're going to suffer adverse consequences because of it. You may say that stinks, that's unfair, but I'm just here to tell you that's how it is. But since that's how it is, how do we get to the point that we're okay when even when we do the right thing, there are adverse consequences because of it? Look with me in your Bibles this morning in Genesis chapter 39. Genesis chapter 39. We're going to pick up with verse 20 of that chapter. We're actually going to go through the whole of chapter 40, but we're not going to read it all. We're just going to be walking through this morning. Genesis 39, starting with verse 20. Genesis 39, starting with verse 20, we're told that Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and there he was in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Well, this is only part of the story, and we'll pick up the rest of it in a moment. But what I want you to understand is this. Joseph has done the right thing. He's done a good thing. He's done what is honorable and pleasing to God, but he's suffering adversely because of it. When you or I find ourselves in a similar state, in a similar condition, what are we supposed to do? Well, the first thing that we are to do is to look for the Lord in our isolation. When you suffer unjustly or when you experience adverse consequences for doing the right, the first thing to do is to look for the Lord in your isolation. Joseph at this point is in a bad way. He is experiencing what seems to be an unending string of unfortunate consequences, terrible circumstances. It began with his brothers who, at first they thought about killing him, but they decided, no, we'll just sell him as a slave. He gets sold to slave traders. They take him down to Egypt and they sell him to a man named Potiphar. So he's in a foreign country and he's lost his freedom and he's serving as a slave to a man named Potiphar. Well, he demonstrated himself to be a guy that's worthy of being trusted, and he gets elevated in Joseph among Potiphar's staff to effectively become the chief of staff. That's good, but he's still a slave. But what begins to complicate matters is what we looked at in the past couple of weeks, and that is that Potiphar's wife looks at Joseph longingly. She thinks, hey, this is a good-looking dude. And she approaches him. She seeks to seduce and entice him. She wants to have an affair with him. And repeatedly she tries to do this. But consistently Joseph is clear in his refusals. He rebuffs her advances. And he says, listen, I'm not going to do this. This is sin and wickedness in God's eyes. Furthermore, beyond that, this would betray the trust that Potiphar has in me. I'm just not going to do that. Well, she doesn't want to take no for an answer. And so what does she do? She effectively cries rape and says, hey, Joseph tried to force himself on me. And you remember what happened last week. Potiphar has him, and that's where we find Joseph now, has him confined to prison. In fact, chapter 40 reveals to us not simply is he in prison, he's in the dungeon of the prison. What I'd have you note, though, is what you see in verse 20. Verse 20 talks about how Potiphar, what he did. He had Joseph put into prison. But notice how verse 21 begins. It begins with the conjunction but. This is what Potiphar did, but this is what God did. We're told, but God was with Joseph and showed him mercy. It causes him again to find favor in the eyes of those that manage him or supervise him or are entrusted with his care. He gets effectively promoted in the prison so that he's the warden's number 2 man. But then notice again in verse 23, it says the keeper of the prison didn't look into anything that was under Joseph's authority. Why? Because the Lord was with him. That's 3 verses, and twice we're told that the Lord was with Joseph. Now, get the picture in your mind. Joseph has absolutely, completely done the right thing. Potiphar's wife tried to force herself on Joseph, and he says, no, that's not going to happen. She makes up a lie, concocts this ruse about Joseph to destroy his character and his integrity. It results in him being unjustly tossed into prison. Not simply into prison, but in a dungeon, and he's done not one single thing wrong. He's completely innocent. He's the victim of all of this. He's done the right thing, and he is suffering adversely because of it. The reasonable question, oftentimes the logical question to ask when you experience those types of circumstances as a follower of God is this: where are you? Why in the world is this happening? How can this be happening? I've sought to do what you said, God. These are the rules that you gave me to follow. I've been following them. I've been doing the right thing. So how is it I'm in jail? How is it that I'm in a dungeon? God, why are you allowing this to happen? God, where are you? Where are you? Now, we don't have to wonder where the Lord was relative to Joseph because, again, twice we're told in 3 verses where God was. He was with Joseph. He was with Joseph. As Potiphar has unjustly tossed him into prison, Joseph is in this place of what otherwise might be viewed as isolation and desolation. But again, we're told that the Lord was with him. And not only was the Lord with Joseph, he did for him what he's done before, which is to cause him to find favor in the eyes of others, so that this warden again effectively promotes him. You know, the truth is, though you and I will probably never experience the exact, and we will never experience the exact circumstances that Joseph is going through, each of us, though, is going to experience a similar type of predicament. And that is that if you are serious as a follower of God, wanting to do what God has said, you're going to be doing the right thing, and you're going to suffer because of it. There's going to be a price, an unjust price that is imposed on you because you decided not to go with the flow or to go with the crowd. And when these dungeon experiences come up, the quickest, easiest human response is to say, well, God, where are you? So before that ever comes, we need to tell ourselves what we need to do, what we've got to do. We've got to look for the Lord in our isolation because the truth is, He's going to be there with us. You may very well experience something similar to Joseph, and that is that you will find yourself on the receiving end of adverse circumstances unjustly. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't deserve this treatment. You didn't deserve these circumstances. But the beauty of what's going on here is not the beauty of the wrong perpetrated against Joseph. Rather, it's the beauty of his response. And first and foremost, what you see consistently in the life of Joseph is this is a man that knows God. This is a guy that consistently walks with him. And he was able to realize, even in this place of isolation, hey, God is here with me. He's not abandoned me. He's right here. Let me ask you to do something in your mind for a moment. Think back over your life with the Lord thus far. Whether that's been a few years or it's been multiplied decades. But think about your walk with God thus far. And I want you to ask yourself, when are the times when you felt closest to Him? Now, for however long you've known God, what was going on when He felt especially near and you felt especially close to Him? Now, if we were to all write that down on a piece of paper and not write our names on it and turn those in, if we were to amass all of those results, I believe consistently we would notice something. That the times in life when you or I felt absolutely closest to God was not when we were on top of the mountain, it was when we were down in the valley. Isn't that strange? It's almost counterintuitive. You would think that when everything is going great, that's when we feel the closest to God, but the truth is, generally, it's the opposite. Why is that? Well, because when life is going just fine, when everything is hunky-dory, when we don't have needs, when the bills are met, when the kids are listening, when our spouse loves us, when our coworkers get along with us, so many times what we do is we just forget about God. Because we don't need His guidance, we don't need His provision, we don't need His help, we don't need anything, and so we just kind of forget about Him. And what happens is that we drift further and further and further from Him. But you find yourself like Joseph in a dungeon when you've got nothing, when you've got no one. Then all of a sudden you realize just how much you need Him. When your back is against the wall and the walls are squeezing in, then you recognize, I need you, and you're right here with me. It's not the mountaintop experiences, it's in those valley experiences. What I'm saying to you is that we're going to experience those valley experiences, and we'd better be intentional about looking for God in those isolated circumstances. Not only because He's going to be there with us, but because of this fact. Let me ask you, as you're surveying in your mind your walk with God at this point, when are the seasons of life, or what were the circumstances of life when you would say, I learned the most about God, the most about His Word, the most about Him? Is it when everything was going great, or was it when everything had gone in the tank? Odds are, again, it's going to be when life turned sour, when the obstacles were great, when the trouble was significant, when the pain was real, when the grief was weighty, when the sorrow was significant. Why is that? Because of two realities. First of all, we tend to find ourselves closest to God when we're experiencing trouble. And when you and I are experiencing trouble, not only are those the times that we tend to be closest to God, those are our most teachable moments. Those are our most teachable moments. We're paying attention to God and learning from Him in ways that we otherwise never would have. We're thinking about Him and thinking about His truth, thinking about His Word, thinking about His ways, discovering things that otherwise we would have never paid attention to. That's why the psalmist says this in Psalm 119, verse 17, "It is good for me that I was afflicted, that I may learn your statutes." The psalmist is saying, yeah, what I went through, that stunk, but the blessing of it is, God, I learned all kinds of stuff about you. Not because things were going great, but because things were going terrible. The simple reality is that we learn so much about God, about His Word, about His guidance, about His provision, about His love, about His guidance when, like Joseph, we're in the dungeon, when we are in the place of isolation, when we are suffering for doing the right thing. And so even before that time comes, what must we do? We've got to tell ourselves, I need to look for the Lord in my isolation. That's going to be the time when I can feel closest to Him, and it's also the time when I think I will learn the most about Him. My first year of seminary was my best friend Alan's last year at State. He was trying to cram 4 years into 5, and so what we wind up doing is that Southeastern Seminary, that's in the town of Wake Forest, just north of Raleigh, we wind up having an apartment about halfway between State and Southeastern Seminary. And so that my first year there, we lived together. And I don't know where we got this, whether he brought it or I did, but we wound up with a chess set. And neither one of us knew anything about how to play chess. And one day we just got it out and read the instructions and decided, hey, we're going to learn how to play chess. So that's what we did. And bit by bit, over time, as days and weeks began to pass, and we weren't playing constantly, but we were playing fairly regularly, and we start to get to the point where we understand how this game works. And we're getting to the point where we're both feeling, hey, we're pretty good chess players. Now, I was better than he was, but we're both thinking that we're pretty good chess players. Well, one day, I was there at the apartment by myself, and I said, I wish I could play chess, but Alan's not here. And I looked on my computer, and it had a chess game on it. So I thought, well, I will play the computer. And so I began, and so I moved my pawn first. The computer moves its pawn. And after about 4 moves, half of my guys are gone, and I'm in checkmate. I mean, a lot of times you think about a chess match and you see them on TV and they go on for hours and hours and hours. This chess match could have occurred during a commercial break. And all of a sudden, I have been decimated by this computer. And I wasn't set on like some advanced mode. I'm like at beginner. And all of a sudden, this thing has wiped me out. Very quickly, I discovered, you know what? Not only was I not that good, I didn't realize how good or how poor a player I was until I experienced and faced real opposition. It's when you experience real opposition that you come to just fully discover the truth about yourself, the truth about God, to discover that He's there and to learn all sorts of important and invaluable lessons. When your dungeon experience comes, when you experience, as Joseph did, unjust and adverse circumstances, even for doing the right, look for the Lord in your isolation. But there's another thing that we must do, and that is to look for opportunities in our trouble. Look for opportunities in our trouble. As you get to chapter 40, we're told that it came to pass after these things that the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, that's the Pharaoh, they offended their Lord. And Pharaoh was angry with his 2 officers, the chief butler and the baker, and he put them in the custody of the house of the captain of the guard, that's Potiphar, and into the prison, the place where Joseph was confined. Now, we do not know what the Pharaoh's cupbearer and what his butler did wrong. We don't know whether it was trivial and insignificant or whether it was something of great consequence. All we know is that they ticked the Pharaoh off, and so he has them sent and remanded to the custody of the prison. So here they are, they're in jail, they're in prison, but they're in the same place where Joseph is. Now, as this passage begins to unfold, we're told in verse 5 that the butler and the baker who were confined in the prison, they had a dream, both of them. Verse 6 says, Joseph came into them in the morning and looked at them, and he saw they were sad. And he asks in verse 7, why do you look so sad? And they began to describe how they had these dreams, and the significance of them is vexing them. It's weighing them down. Now, dreams are a strange thing, aren't they? And most of us, in fact, all of us, have had dreams where we wake up in the morning and we're thinking about whatever it was that we dreamt, and we think, well, that was crazy. That didn't make any sense whatsoever. I mean, that was the strangest thing. But then there are other times where you might have had a dream and you thought or wondered, is there anything to that? I mean, is there something I should be learning? I mean, is somehow in this dream, is God trying to tell me something? Well, it was that type of dream that the Pharaoh's baker and his butler have experienced. And they've had this dream, and both of them, they wake up and they're weighed down by this, wondering, I wonder what that means. Is someone somehow trying to get my attention? Is there something here of significance I need to be paying attention to? What's the big deal with this? And it's so weighing on their mind that it becomes tangible in their countenance. So much so that Joseph sees these guys and says, hey, guys, what's the matter? Why the long faces? Why is it that you are so sad? Now, a couple of things I'd have you note to this point. And the first is this. Isn't it amazing how often God brings alongside us people who are going through what we have gone through or who are presently going through a similar circumstance when we're facing trouble. No, odds are, as you have experienced trouble in your life as a follower of Christ thus far, as you are going through your own terrible, painful, grievous, sad, weighty, whatever it is, burdensome experience, isn't it interesting how consistently, as you're going through that, God will bring alongside you people who are either going through the same thing or they've already been there? Isn't that interesting? I don't believe it to be coincidental. I believe that's the activity of God at work. And I think what we see going on here is that though Joseph and the baker and the butler have all come to this prison because of differing experiences, they're all in the same place and they're all sharing the same misery. The other thing I'd have you note is this. If there is any out of this group of three that should have had a long, sad face, it is Joseph. Now, whatever the baker and the butler did, they have clearly ticked off the Pharaoh. And whether prison was necessarily warranted or not, they have done something wrong. Joseph hasn't done a single thing wrong. He's rebuffed his master's wife's advances. He refuses to commit adultery. He's done the right thing in Potiphar's eyes and in God's eyes. And here he is in prison, in a dungeon with no release date. He is at this point in prison, effectively serving a life sentence. If there's anybody that should have looked sour and had a dour countenance, it was Joseph. And when they're looking so sad, very easily, Joseph could have said, "Buck up, guys. You want to hear a sad story? Listen to mine." But he doesn't do that. He's reaching out to these guys, to the butler and to the baker, and he's saying, "Hey, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you?" And as he asks that question, they say in verse 8, "We have each had a dream. There's no interpreter of it." And then notice Joseph's response, verse 8 of chapter 40. "Do not interpretations belong to God?" So he's saying, hey, this is the purview, this is the jurisdiction of God. This whole idea of dream interpretation. But then he says, "Tell them to me, please." Now, on the surface, that may sound as though this is just curiosity at work and Joseph being nosy. But I don't believe that's it whatsoever. I believe what he's intentional about doing is to say, guys, you've got this dream that is vexing you and burdensome to you. It's weighing you down. In terms of meaning, only God knows. But you know what? I know Him. Will you tell me about it? And I can talk to Him on your behalf, and maybe you can get some answers. That's what he is saying. Isn't that interesting? Joseph is in a place that he doesn't want to be in. He's in a lousy circumstance. He's not simply in prison, he's in a dungeon. And he is in there for the indefinite future. A place not of his own choosing or liking. And what is he doing? He's paying attention and seizing opportunities to serve God. Isn't that what he's doing? When you and I find ourselves like Joseph in adverse circumstances, even if it's because we've done the right thing, and especially if it is because we have done the right thing, we need to be looking for opportunities in our trouble. Let me see if I can paint the picture for you this way. One of the things that I try to be intentional about in terms of how I do what God's called me to is to invest in the lives of people. I mean, to share time with you and to be with you in life's ups and downs, when things are great and when things just go south. And in trying to and making sure that I spend time and intentional about sharing life with you, I've been able to build many significant, real, and meaningful relationships. That's been true at Gate City. It was also true at the church where I pastored in Charlotte for almost 10 years. Because of those relationships, I've been asked repeatedly to come back to officiate or conduct some funeral services for some folks I had served there. In fact, just about 3 weeks ago, I had to go back and preach another funeral. In all honesty, though, I'm glad to be able to help those families and to honor the life of these people that were dear to me. That's not something that's on my top 10 list of things to do. I'm not itching to go to Charlotte this week to preach a funeral. And the primary reason for that is because of all the time that's involved. I mean, for one thing, I've got to spend the time to talk to the family, to ask all the questions that I need to be able to get enough information to write the service. And once I've got that, then I've got the time of actually writing what it is that I'm going to say. Once that's done, I've got 3 hours at the very least worth of travel time from here to there and back. But you don't just get there as the service starts. You've got to get there early. And so I've got more of that time. And then there's the lag between the end of the service and going to the cemetery. And then that slow ride there, the time involved at the cemetery, and then the time traveling back. It's a huge consumer of time. Takes the better part of a day. Well, actually more than a day when you figure the prep time and actually doing one of these services. And so because of that, these are not my favorite things to do. These are circumstances I'm not itching to get into. That being said, when I do experience this, I am intentional about one thing. I'm intentional about thinking about where it is that I'm going to eat when I'm in Charlotte. And as I'm driving to Charlotte, I spend some time thinking about, because I don't eat at nice places. I eat at dumps and dives and joints, places that don't have multiple locations. And so I start thinking about places that I used to like to go to that I haven't been able to go to. And so I'll rattle that through my mind and think about time-wise when I'll be able to get there. And so I will pick out one of these places to go and eat while I'm in Charlotte. And my mentality, my thought is this: I'm not itching to have to go to Charlotte to preach a funeral, but so long as I'm there, I might as well take advantage of something I don't ever get an opportunity to experience now. I'm in a circumstance that I'm not thrilled about, but while I'm there, I might as well take advantage of it to experience something that I otherwise would not. What I want you to get is that type of mentality that needs to permeate our lives, my life, and your life as a follower of Christ. When we find ourselves, when you find yourself in a troubled spot, I think we need to tell ourselves this: I'm in a circumstance that I'm not thrilled about, but so long as I am here, I might as well do something that I otherwise might never get a chance to. This is what I want you to see. Were it not for this circumstance, were it not for Joseph winding up unjustly in prison for doing the right thing, would he have ever crossed paths with the butler, with the baker? Almost certainly not. Were he to never have been able to cross paths with them, would he ever be able to demonstrate the fact that he knows God and communicate to them, this is a God that has the power, even the power to show you the interpretation of dreams? Would he have ever had that chance? Not at all. Not at all. The point, the application for us, I believe then, is pretty simple. As a follower of Christ, you're going to make some right decisions to do the good thing, the God-honoring thing, and sometimes there's going to be adverse circumstances that come your way because of that. But when you get into those circumstances and when you find yourself in those places, you're going to be intersecting the lives of other people and experiencing opportunities to reflect God and to serve Him that you would have never, ever, ever had otherwise. So as you find yourself in that troubled spot, I've got to be intentional about looking for opportunities. Yes, it is that God is there with us. It is true, certainly, that He has allowed us to experience these circumstances. And one of the reasons that He has allowed us into those circumstances is that He wants to use us, not just up on the mountain, but to use us even in the valley. Look for the Lord in your isolation. Be intentional about looking for opportunities in your trouble. And then finally, what we've got to do is to look for lapses in our faith. To look for lapses in our faith. Beginning in verse 9, the butler begins to tell Joseph, hey, this is what my dream was. And he says, in my dream there was a vine before me. In the vine there were 3 branches, and its clusters brought forth ripe grapes. Verse 11, the Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes, pressed them in the Pharaoh's cup, and placed them in the Pharaoh's hand. So that was my dream. This vine with 3 branches produced grapes. I squeezed them. I make wine for the Pharaoh, and I present it to him. I have no idea what that means. And so Joseph tells him the meaning of it. He says, listen, 3 days are going to pass, and after that 3rd day, you're going to be released from prison, and you're going to be back preparing wine for the Pharaoh. You'll be released, you'll be free, you'll be serving again. Well, hearing this, the baker's thinking, well, hey, I've got some good news in store for me as well. You go ahead and tell me what my dream means. And this is what happened to me in the dream. So he's a baker, and as a baker in this dream, he's got 3 baskets on his head. And in the top basket, there's all sorts of different breads. There's white bread and wheat bread. Wheat bread. Anyway, there's pumpernickel, there's rye, there's biscuits, there's rolls, there's yeast rolls, there's all these various breads in this top basket on top of his head. But in his dream, these baskets are on there, all the bread in the top one, and birds come by and they peck and they eat and they take away all the bread. He tells Joseph, I have no idea what this means. And Joseph shares with him the meaning of the dream. And how does Joseph know the meaning of the dream? Is it because of special gifts and insight that he has? No, it's because God knows the meaning of the dreams, and God tells those to Joseph. He's reflecting the truth and the power of God and tells the baker the interpretation. But it's not good news for the baker. What he informs and has to regretfully inform him is, 3 days are going to pass, just like for the butler. And on this 3rd day, you're going to be taken from jail, but you're not going to be released. The Pharaoh is going to have your head cut off. They're going to hang your dead corpse, and birds are going to come by and eat your flesh. You're talking about being the bearer of bad news. But that's what he tells him. All right, so day 1 passes. All 3 are still in jail. Day 2 passes. 3rd day comes along. All of a sudden, there's some summons that occurs, and the wine bearer, the butler, he's released. He goes back to serve the Pharaoh. The baker is also taken from his cell and literally loses his head. Everything that Joseph said has transpired. What I want you to notice, though, is what Joseph tells the cupbearer, the butler, in verses 14 and 15. He's just telling him, hey, you're going to get out. You're going to be back serving the Pharaoh. Notice this. He says, remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this place. Indeed, I was stolen away from the land of Hebrews, and also I've done nothing here that they should put me in this dungeon. So he's saying, hey, you're getting ready to get out. You're going to be back with the Pharaoh. Will you put in a good word for me so that I can get out of this joint? That's what he's saying. Now, from us, that seems to be fairly insignificant. That seems to be very prudent. This is a guy that has an audience with the Pharaoh, and if there's anybody that can get Joseph out of this prison, it's Pharaoh. Seems reasonable. He's networking is what he's doing, isn't he? Well, it's more than networking. And though it seems insignificant to us, I believe this to be very significant in the eyes of God. There are 2 instances in Genesis where Joseph demonstrates what I believe you could even remotely describe as a lapse of faith, and I believe this is the first one. Why I believe this is significant is for this reason. Joseph, in appealing to the cupbearer, is putting his trust someplace. But where is he putting his trust? He's putting his trust in a man. Not in the God who's been with him, not in the God that has elevated him, not in the God that has given him the interpretation of these dreams. He's putting his trust in the Pharaoh's butler. And so he says, hey, remember me when you get out of here, because, and it's all of a sudden, Joseph has been seemingly optimistic. He's been bearing these circumstances well, but it's as if for a moment he's got a pity party. And he says, it just stinks. He said, I was betrayed. I was sold into slavery. I wound up here. I've been unjustly accused. I've been sentenced to prison for no good reason. I've done nothing but the good. I've done nothing but the right. I've done nothing to deserve being in this dungeon. Remember me when you get out so that I can get out of this pit. But the problem with that is that though it was natural, though it was reasonable from our perspective, he's losing his focus. His focus is not on the God that's with him. His focus is on what somebody else, what a man can do for him. He's tired of waiting on God. He's tired of waking up in this jail. He's ready for circumstances to change. And if God's not going to do it, well, bless God, maybe the Pharaoh's cupbearer can get me out of here. And so that's what he does. Well, if somebody like Joseph could have a lapse in faith like that, you know that it can happen to me. You know that it can happen to you. And like Joseph, we may find ourselves in our own personal pits, our own personal dungeons or valleys that may go on and last for a lengthy period of time. And as we are experiencing that, initially our faith may remain strong, but we've got to watch out, and we've got to be vigilant, because otherwise we'll lose focus. And we'll shift our focus from God and what He's revealing to us in these circumstances, how He's getting us through this, what He's trying to teach us, and we start focusing on just how bad this is. And if God's not changing it, well, our focus gets on our circumstances and to who might be able to get us out. Joseph was getting ready to spend another 2 years in this jail. 2 whole years in this dungeon. Why do you think it was going to take that long? We can't say for sure, but I believe this is the reason. I think it was going to take God that long to get Joseph's focus, to get his attention back where it needed to be. Let me see if I can paint the picture for you this way. There was a house that caught on fire one night, a 2-story house, and as the flames began to spread, everybody gets out of the house. This entire family gets out except for the young son. He's in an upstairs bedroom. He's awakened by the sound of the smoke detectors going off, and as he wakes up, he sees flames are outside his door. He knows that heading out through his bedroom door and downstairs, that's not a possibility. And if something doesn't happen, he's going to die in this fire. He's scared to death. He's a little boy after all. So what he does, though, is to open his window, and he climbs out, and outside of his window is the roof or the porch below. He climbs out into the darkness of night with these flames behind him, doesn't know what to do. If something doesn't happen, he's going to die. He's going to be burned by this fire. But as this is going on, his family has gathered outside, and his father looks up and he sees his son standing on the roof of that porch. And he calls out to his son and he says, "Jump, I'll catch you." But the little boy can't see. All he can see are the flames behind him, and there's all of this smoke out in front of him. He's scared of these heights and this thought of jumping out into the nothingness of night. His father says, "Hey, jump, I'll catch you." And the little boy says back to his father, "But I can't see you." And the father's response very simply was this: "But I can see you, and that's all that matters." I can see you, and that's all that matters. Listen, there's going to be some circumstances that you and I as a follower of God find ourselves in. And we may say it's unjust and it's unfair. It stinks. I've been doing the right thing. Why is the wrong happening to me? And you're going to be calling out to God, sometimes wondering where He is, and thinking sometimes that His silence is just baffling. And God's calling out for you to trust Him, to lean on and lean hard into Him. And you're like, "Hey, I can't see you." I believe His word for us very simply is this: I can see you, and that's all that matters. And that's all that matters. You may be in your pit now. You might have been in the pit, or you're getting ready to go through one. But if you're serious about this whole thing of following the Lord in your life, it's going to cause you to make some choices and decisions. And sometimes you're going to do the right thing, and you're going to suffer adversely because of it. You need to know going into it, you've got some options, you've got some choices, and you've got some counsel from God. His counsel for you very simply is this: to look for Him in your isolation, to look for opportunities in your trouble, and pay attention. Watch out for cracks in the foundation. Look out, watch out, be on guard against lapses in your faith, because those circumstances are going to make it very difficult for you to see the hand of God at work. But even though it's difficult for you to see Him, He's got no trouble seeing you. So when push comes to shove, this is a message that poses us with this question: from the Lord to me, to you, do you really trust me? Do you really trust me? Won't you bow your heads with me? Trouble has come, or is presently coming, or is soon to come in each of our lives. And when that happens, there's going to be some responses that very reasonably and naturally we could have. Joseph knew what that was like, knew what those struggles were. And thankfully, God recorded for us the story of his life that we might learn from it, so that we don't have to go through the school of hard knocks. We can say, better that Joseph went through that and learned that, and that God recorded this so I can practice this in my life. I have no idea what you're going through, and certainly even have less idea what it is that God's going to lead you to experience in the days, weeks, or years ahead. But I do know this much: trouble's coming for all of us. So the question is, what are you going to do in advance of it? What will your trust be on that day? In many ways, it's a reflection of where your trust is right now. And perhaps God's been showing you, and he's spoken to you through the truth of his word, through the power of his Spirit. You've been very much like a Joseph, where you've been putting your trust in anyone and everything else except God. You've been putting your trust in people that can be seen, voices that can be audibly heard. And God's saying, hey, even if you find it difficult to see me, I can see you. Lean hard and lean firm into me. So because of what God has said to your heart and in your heart today, there may be some decisions that he's prompting you to make, and I don't know what those are. Maybe it's just to come and kneel and talk to him. Say, God, this is where I am. You show me where I need to be, and I need some help getting from here to there. Maybe God's prompting you to find out how it is that you can have a personal relationship with him like Joseph had, like so many here this morning have. Maybe it's to become a part of this church family. Maybe it's just a burden on your heart for somebody that's going through a Joseph-type experience, and you just want to talk to God on their behalf. I don't know what God's saying. All I know is this: he has spoken, he is speaking, and we've got an opportunity to do something with what he said. So what are you going to do? God, we want to thank you for your word, for speaking to us, for showing us something about our present and even our future circumstances. Lord, I pray that we are not simply hearers of the word, but we are impacted and become doers of it. We've got an opportunity now during this time of decision to do something with what you have said. And as God, you have spoken to our hearts, I pray that we respond in a way that's pleasing to you, very simply with faith and obedience in whatever way you guide. We commit this time of decision to you in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to ask if you would to stand. Tom and our praise team are going to lead us in the hymn of invitation. Has God spoken to you to do something this morning for his sake and for your personal good? Will you just do it?